Hello, everybody. My name is Maurice Button. I'm the CEO of City and Financial Global, and it's my great pleasure to be interviewing Dr. Tim Stone, CBE, Chair of the Nuclear Industry Association and Chair of Nuclear Risk Insurers. Tim will be chairing and speaking at the New Nuclear Summit, which is being held in central London on the 18th of May. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Maurice. Lovely to be here.
Our absolute pleasure to have you with us. Let's turn to the questions. How important was yesterday's budget announcement that nuclear will be classified as sustainable under the government's forthcoming green taxonomy?
The announcement yesterday by the Chancellor that nuclear will be classified as sustainable is a critical step forward, because for many investors, they need to know that investments in there that they make are ESG compatible, or more broadly sustainability sensitive. And recognising at long last that nuclear is indeed sustainable is a critical step forward and will support the future investment in the many projects that we're going to be having in the UK going forward. So it's a great step forward. I just hope that the subject to consultation bit doesn't hide a little minefield, but I don't think so. I think we're now in a very good state on this, but yeah, well done.
Fingers crossed it won't hide any nasty surprises. I've known you for many years. I've known you in your former incarnations where you've been involved in financing major projects around the world. So why is it that it is so difficult to finance new nuclear in the UK? Do you think, as many people have argued, there's a need to de-risk the construction phase and insulate investors from those risks? And how useful do you think the RAB model might be for nuclear investment?
That's quite a long story. So let's start out with the big issue, which is that nuclear can be built to time and budget, as the Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese have proven over and over again, if you keep doing it. And it's the stop-start where you build a supply chain for people, and then they all go away again. And you have to relearn it over and over and over again, and it's just frankly the silliest way to do it. So the programmatic approach is precisely what we need, and that's precisely how other infrastructure projects work well. But at the gigawatt scale, when you're talking 15, 20 billion, what's the Groucho Marx thing about a billion here, a billion there, so you're talking about real money? Fundamentally, at that level, it's a sovereign risk. It always has been. And so the state, whilst they shouldn't be building things themselves, they need to make sure that they're built properly and that they are carefully thought through and that the preparations are made ahead of time. So if we add to that the fact that the construction sector in the UK has basically no capital base, so the idea of transferring risk to them, it might work for a £50 million hospital. It doesn't work for a £20 billion nuclear power project. So we need to make sure that, as with all big infrastructure projects, the homework is done first, the industry is properly prepared, the supply chain for people is properly prepared. So that we can do, and it becomes a different issue altogether when we get to the stage where we can crank out small modular reactors, I should say small modular power stations, on a manufacturing basis. Now, RAB works fine for projects where the risks are reasonably bounded, and indeed, as with Thames Tideway, there's a government support package to deal with the tail risks. It's important going forwards for Sizewell that they are indeed tail risks, and that all the learning from Hinkley, particularly Unit 2, is built into the Sizewell project, so that the likelihood of it going adrift is dramatically reduced. And with the new chairman, Rob Holden, who in fact is the chap who built HS1 on budget and in fact slightly under time, we have precisely the right guy to make that work.
So when you talk about the sort of programmatic approach, presumably that's what Great British Nuclear is going to help to achieve. Do you think it will be an effective catalyst, and do you think it will meet these sorts of expectations?
Great British Nuclear, as we described in the report that was submitted to the Prime Minister last September, has basically got everything I've ever wanted in terms of how to make nuclear happen in the UK. So I'm completely confident that provided it's implemented in the way that the report recommended, it will make a huge, huge difference. And treating the whole nuclear build, whether large and small, as one long continuous programme, and understanding and planning for the interrelationships between them, building the supply chain so that we can manufacture and deliver at scale is precisely what we need. There was little details yesterday in the budget. There'll be some more in a couple of weeks to come, I think, and indeed by the time of our conference we should have a lot more detail that I'd be very happy to talk about when we get there. But yes, GBN has the potential to do this properly. In fact, probably at least as well as any other country, and maybe even better than most of them.
And presumably there are lessons from Partnerships UK, Infrastructure UK, and so on, and other programmatic approaches that the government's used in the past. So let's hope all of those lessons are factored in. In the budget, the Chancellor announced that GBN will run a competition to help SMR technology develop in the UK. Is that the best way forward? And how important are SMRs and AMRs in the UK's nuclear mix?
So SMRs in particular are very important in the short to medium term in the nuclear mix. AMRs, I suspect in the long run will be more to do with heat and hydrogen chemical processes, but we'll see. Yep. The real issue now for the SMRs is that we select a couple of technologies, and I use the word select very carefully here, because the one thing you can't do with a first of a kind of anything is to run a competition which is all about the pound notes, because you won't know until you've done it. What you have to do is to run a selection process to figure out which technologies we have the most confidence in, that when they've been properly engineered, the manufacturing and the assembly carefully planned and sensible contracts placed, that they will deliver precisely as we expect and actually build the reputation of the UK for its ability to deliver small modular power stations on time and on budget and with an ever-reducing cost. So the programmatic approach is critical, but the word competition, I think we need to be really careful about that, because it cannot be the classic public procurement approach, because you simply don't have the data. But I do recognise that the word competition is completely built into the civil service and government psyche.
Indeed, yes, and I take your point, and I think the way you described it is more accurate. And later this month, the government will launch its net zero strategy and its new green finance strategy. Do you think there'll be much in either of those for new nuclear?
I think somewhere in that process, we will probably now see the full announcement of Great British Nuclear by the Secretary of State. There's clearly quite a lot to announce, because after the NA report about the lack of coherent plan for 2050, that has to be properly addressed, and indeed I'm sure it will be. But yes, as part of that, I think that's where we will see all the details, or as much of the details as we can release at the early stages of what Great British Nuclear is intended to be, and the process for setting it up, staffing it and so on. And indeed I hope we will then see the scale of the budget that's been heavily discussed within the system over the last few months.
Fantastic. Exciting times, I think, for UK new nuclear. Tim, I wish we could talk a little bit further about these issues, but we'll pick up on all of this at the event on the 18th of May in London. I very much hope that our viewers will join us in person at that event. If they wish to do so, please visit the City and Financial website, www.cityandfinancial.com. Just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us, Tim.
Delighted, Maurice. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing everybody on the 18th of May.